A couple of ground rules that I think we should just agree to. We need to remember the importance of confidentiality. We are going to be talking about and sharing situations that are challenging and that are directly related to staff and students in your school. So please, and I know you know this, but please make sure that there are no identifying features about any particular people when we are having the opportunity to have, as we have our conversation. Another piece that I think we should just acknowledge right up front is that we all know how much we need more resources in the area of special education. We can't control that tonight, but what I'm hoping we can do is over the course of the next hour, I'm hoping that I can share some strategies with you to control the things that you can. So while we continue to advocate for more supports, let's see what it is that we can do to really support your student need. I am going to be presenting some chunks of content. And I ask at that time while I'm presenting content, if you can just hold off on texting anything into the chat because I'm not able to talk and follow. But then I'll create little mini breaks. I'm going to pose a question or a problem or something that I'd like you to respond to. And I'll give you the opportunity to share that information. We have a large number of participants who have registered for tonight, so we will do our best to connect with people. And at the end of the session, I'm going to give you some opportunities that are going to be available for more in-depth conversation about special education. If you do have the ability to turn your mic on, we ask that you keep it off, and just so that we reduce any background noise. So we're going to get started here. Some of you had shared with me in advance some of the challenges that you're experiencing, and I'm going to make sure that we at least touch on what those challenges are. A couple of things that we're certainly seeing across the province is that you can be challenged with staff who are not meeting the needs of their students and are not following the IEP, and can be at times punitive towards students with special education needs. So that's one thing that we're familiar with for sure. Another question that you've posed is, how do we manage severe aggression and yet maintain a calm, purposeful learning environment? So I'm going to share a few strategies with you tonight that I'm hoping will get you at least something that you can begin to work with. And another question is around really firefighting. How can you avoid always being in a crisis mode and move towards being more proactive in how you address special education in your schools? So I am hoping that we can touch on a few of those items tonight. I want you to kind of frame tonight and have a lens through which you're hearing what I'm sharing. So think about one situation or one student in your school that is posing a challenge around aggressive behavior or significant challenge in the area of special education. And I want you to work through this webinar with that student or that situation in mind. And I'm hoping that at the end of the evening, you have at least one or two new strategies that you can try starting tomorrow that might start to make that situation a little bit better. So we're going to look at 4 key areas, and I recognize that we only have an hour together tonight, and so that's going to limit the depth for which we can go into each of these topics. But we're going to spend a few minutes looking at key pieces of legislation that relate directly to special education. We're going to talk about some specific programming ideas that will help to reduce some of that aggressive behavior that you may be experiencing in your school. We're going to talk a little bit about communication and how important that is when we are working through complex situations. And these are very complex when we have students with significant special education needs that come across as behavior needs. There are multiple stakeholders involved, and so communication is a key piece to starting to alleviate some of those concerns. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how you can maximize the supports that you do have in your building to maybe better meet the needs of the students. So we are going to start talking about legislation, and we know that through your PQP courses, and if you have taken special education part 1, 2, or specialist, you have a pretty good sense of some of these. But I'm just wanting to highlight a few features of the pieces of legislation or the policies that you may have in your school district that you need to be really aware of. It's the legislative pieces and the procedural pieces and the policies that are the foundation on which you need to respond, and you have a responsibility as a school leader. So the first one, as we all know, is in the Education Act, and that's Regulation 181/98. And that really deals with the whole IPRC and the IEP process. And I'm not going to go into any detail about that tonight because that's not really what we're here for, other than just to make sure that you really are paying attention to the timelines that are outlined in Reg 181. If you jump down in that bulleted list, you see Special Education in Ontario 2017. And this is a document that came out in late summer, early fall from the ministry. And this is your go-to document for anything to do around legislation. Special Education in Ontario 2017 outlines very clearly the IPRC process that you must follow, the timelines, the requirements for an IEP, even class sizes for special education students. So if you are unsure of any of those timelines or your role and responsibility around an IPRC and an IEP, I really encourage you to go into that Spec Ed in Ontario document. It's written in easy to read language and is intended for educators. One of the pieces of legislation that I'm sure you are aware of, but I just want to highlight a couple of features, and that is the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So again, our focus is really around students who are showing aggressive behavior. And there are a few pieces in the Occupational Health and Safety Act that we need to be paying close attention to because we are responsible for ensuring that we are implementing what is expected of us. So for example, when we have a student in our school or coming into our school, that we have documentation that suggests that that student may pose a safety risk for staff members, we are obligated to inform any staff members who may be coming in contact and working with that student of the potential risk of injury. Now, we can do that in a way that we are not sharing it with the entire staff. There are different layers of informing staff that in terms of how much they need to know about a student. Without question, any staff member who is in direct contact, though, with a student that poses the risk of injury for others, we need to inform them of that potential. But along with that, it is our obligation to ensure that they have any protective equipment that they may need in order to protect themselves. So that may be Kevlar vests or sleeves or shin guards. And a piece around the protective equipment that is really important is that if that is in a student's behavior safety plan, it is required that your staff wear it at all times. One of the things that I've seen in the roles that I've been in, and I was supervising principal of special education in Durham at one point, and we certainly saw some of our staff members who chose not to consistently wear that protective equipment. It is our obligation to make sure that they do. And their union supports that as well. CUPE and OSSTF and ETFO really want our staff members not to get injured. So we need to be very direct with our staff members that they are required to wear it. Another piece from the Occupational Health and Safety Act that we need to remember is the importance of having walkie-talkies or a communication system in place so that any staff members who are working with a student with needs can communicate with others for assistance. We are required also to ensure that they have appropriate training. And excuse me, that is essential whether we have the capability of providing that training or we need to bring in central staff. But any members of our staff who are working with a high needs student need to be provided with that particular training. An interesting piece around the Occupational Health and Safety Act is that some staff members actually have the right to refuse unsafe work. And this has been a challenge across the province. Um, Through the Education Act, teachers do not have the same right to refuse unsafe work because they are the supervisors of all students. So they can be concerned about and certainly express concerns about safety. But it's our other staff members, such as education assistants, who actually have the right to refuse unsafe work. So if you're in a position where you are hearing rumblings that there may be a work refusal, you need to address that as proactively and as immediately as possible. Because what happens is if an education assistant, for example, refuses work, the Ministry of Labor actually comes into your school to assess the situation. And that's just a mess that you really don't want to get into. So when you hear of a staff member who's expressing the potential of refusing work because of an unsafe situation, you need to, that's kind of a cry for help. They're feeling that they don't have the skills. They're feeling like they need your support to be able to navigate this situation better. And you really need to be in contact with your central office, probably your supervisory officer, if you're hearing rumblings about unsafe work. So that like everything else kind of goes to the back burner, and you need to address that one right away. Another piece of legislation that's important is PPM, Policy, Procedure, Memoranda, and that's kind of like the thou shalt from the ministry, 140. And this has been around for a while and addresses our obligations for students that have ASD, autism spectrum disorder. And just two pieces that I'm going to really highlight. The first is that every student who is identified with autism must have a transition plan as part of their IEP. And that transition plan is highly individualized, and it can be from the micro transitions of a student moving from math to language in the same classroom, right through to students who are in secondary school and moving to post-secondary life, whatever that happens to be. But we really need to ensure, it's our obligation to ensure that there is a transition plan for every student who has been identified with ASD. The other piece, I'm going to touch on this a little later on in our webinar tonight, but is the obligation to use principles of ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis. And in a nutshell, that really is about using data to inform our programming, as well as positive reinforcement of the behaviors that we want to see. So those are not options as part of our programming. That is actually legislated that we need to have that in place for our students with ASD. I think we're pretty comfortable about our obligations around the Safe Schools Act, just always keeping in mind the importance of considering mitigating factors when a student is showing any kind of, I'm going to use the term now, misbehavior. It doesn't mean that we can't suspend students with special education needs. There is a place that is outlined in the Safe Schools Act for that, but we first have to consider very carefully the mitigating factors, such as, does the student understand consequences? Does the student have the cognitive ability to be able to understand consequences and understand their actions? But certainly the Safe Schools Act does inform our practice. I missed the Human Rights Code. Another piece that is essential when we're thinking about students with special education needs, and particularly those with aggression. We need to remember we cannot, and nor can any staff member, discriminate against a student because of their ability or their lack of ability. It is the other piece is we have a duty to accommodate our students. And I'm hoping that I can take a few minutes a little further into our webinar to talk about how we accommodate for our students with special needs, because if we're not careful, we can end up in a situation where we may be discriminating against them. So it's a fine line, and we're always balancing the rights and needs of all the different students in our schools when we're talking about tricky situations like this. Every school board, or almost every school board, has a policy or procedure around risk of injury. Some school boards call it managing aggressive behavior. Every school board has a little different title. If you are not familiar with your board's policy around risk of injury, I really encourage you in the next day or so to dig in and find that, because most school boards have outlined a really clear, helpful process about what you are responsible for doing and who you report to when we're dealing with these kinds of difficult situations. And every school board across the province has incident reporting mechanisms. Again, that's, well, we do have some that are provincial. There are also lots that are very board specific. So make sure that you know what that incident reporting is for your school board. Sometimes there can be a lot of reports when there's a significant issue, when there's been a high degree of aggression and where people are injured. There can be a number of reports that have to be completed, and it can be very time consuming. I've been in that chair recently, and I can certainly recall spending a lot of time, 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, still sitting at my desk as I'm filling out all the necessary reports. But those reports are important for collecting data, both at central office as well as sometimes provincially. And that's sometimes how, when we are ensuring that our reporting is in place, we're accountable for what we're doing. But sometimes then people can also see, here is a volatile situation. We need to look at this in a little bit more, a little careful depth than that one. So we're going to take our first little pause right now. And I believe that it's really important that your staff understand at least the basics of the law and the policies and procedures that are related to working with students with aggressive behavior. So I'm going to ask you this question and type into the chat box: what is one strategy that you could use or that you have been using to ensure that your staff understands the legislation, policies, and procedures of special education in your building? So I'm just going to pause for a minute right now, and I'll let you start to type into the box, and I'll try to pick find a few points that I want to highlight. Be sure to read what other people are writing as well. And just as people are typing, one of the areas that I know that a lot of staff need continued professional learning on is the whole idea around mitigating factors and mitigating considerations. Because we know that a lot of our staff members are looking for consequences and are hoping for suspensions. And when we don't always suspend, they're not understanding of what the law is that we are following. So I know that that's one that we quite often have a little bit of work to do to help our staff. And Jennifer Johnson, thank you. It's nice of you to join us. Jennifer has been in a course that I've taught before, and one of her suggestions is that she highlights a piece of legislation at every staff meeting. And I think that's a great idea, just to have at least a special education moment in your staff meeting, so that we can continue to build that capacity of our staff. Tracy, I really like your idea of a scavenger hunt. Like, may as well make it fun And if you do that early in your school year, that really will help staff to understand what our foundation is, and we'll start to build a shared vision of what we want for our as the foundation for what we're doing in our buildings. Dean, I wish we had more time that we could go into your situation. So you've had a number of situations and you're giving half of your staff meeting to helping your staff understand. You know, that really makes me think about something that I believe very strongly. How special education goes in your school goes the rest of your school. When we get special education right, everything else in our buildings flows so much more smoothly. And I know across Ontario, there's such a focus right now on mathematics, and we understand that. But sometimes our greatest challenges are around special education, and we're not getting enough professional learning around special education. So, with your ability to take on half of your staff meeting around spec ed, that's just going to help everybody, because what is necessary for some is good for all. So you get it right for your highest needs kids, it's going to benefit the rest. So great, great thinking, Dean. Love the idea, Deb, of jigsawing material. That's a great way to get people to dig right in. A lot better than us talking all the time. Getting them to engage with the material is fantastic. There's some really good ideas here, people. I appreciate it. Darlene, I really like your point too about having transparent discussions, open and transparent. I think sometimes as administrators, we try to protect our staff and we don't want to worry them about the big things that are happening. I think it's actually better when we're open with people, because when there is a vacuum of communication, people start to fill that void, and that's where misinformation can grow. So we are better to be open and transparent. I think that's a really important thing, and that actually builds trust with our staff as well. So folks, you've got some excellent ideas here. If you're still thinking of things and want to add a few more, please continue. But I'm hoping that the point of this is everybody needs to find a way that works for your school and your staff, for how you can ensure that your staff understands what their responsibilities are and what our responsibilities are as administrators in the area of our obligations around law and policy. So, because that's the foundation of our day-to-day work, and it's good that everybody knows, so we're on the same page. I'm going to move on to our next little topic, and we're going to talk a little bit about some practical strategies about how to reduce behaviors. And we all know that there are so many reasons for behavior, and these are just some. But significant behaviors are often related to anxiety, and that may come from a particular diagnosis, such as ASD. Students who have experienced trauma are students that often have significant behaviors. There can be developmental concerns, cognitive concerns. Some students who have difficulty with communication for a range of reasons may be experiencing aggressive behavior or significant behaviors. Students who have difficulty processing the sensory and are overstimulated by all of the things that are part of a school can cause a problem. We know that students that are frustrated can sometimes show pretty significant behaviors. And of course, mental health is another concern. So we often have a diagnosis, and sometimes it's the right one, and it's not always the accurate one, but it's the best one we have to work with. But more than anything, the diagnosis isn't the most important thing. What's more important is that we're collecting data and that we can respond to what the triggers are for a student. It is critical that when we have a student who has significant behavior needs, we are keeping really, really detailed ABC data. What's the antecedent? that comes before the behavior, and what does that behavior look like, and then what is the consequence of that behavior. And we don't mean consequence as in our role in discipline. We mean, what does the student get from that behavior? What is that student looking to gain from that behavior? So often we think we know through observing a student what's going on with the student, and we think we know what the trigger is, and we think we know what the motivation is of the student. But I have seen over and over again, when we actually record really carefully for a period of time what those triggers are and what the student's doing before and after, and sometimes we discover incredible things that we never saw otherwise. It really is shifting our perception from being subjective to being much more objective when we look at the data. And then we know specifically the programming that we need to put in place to begin to reduce that severe behavior. So if you have a big concern happening right now in your school, it would be good, even if you in the past had collected some data, go back and really, like, moment by moment, as best as you have staff to be able to do so, try to collect a lot of data and see what it is that's the trigger for that student, and then what can we do to proactively reduce whatever that thing is that is triggering the student. I'm going to give you a bit of a laundry list of strategies that you might want to consider, if you haven't already, to reduce the behavior. And again, I know we are only here for an hour, so it is such a high level that we're able to really address some of these concerns. But maybe there's something that you'll hear tonight that you'll think, oh, now there is a strategy that we haven't tried. As educators, we are the best talkers, and I am right there at the head of the line. And the thing about talking to a student who's got significant behaviors is that can actually increase their anxiety. They may have difficulty processing what we are saying. It may just be too much verbiage. The most important thing that we can do is stop talking. Wherever there's a way to use nonverbal direction or shorter sentences or a very direct and simple statement, that's what we need to do. But we are not helping the student, and we are not serving the rest of the students in the school if we talk and talk and talk at the student, thinking that we can negotiate or that we can convince them, or through lecturing. It never works, and it actually increases the behavior. So if you have staff that are talking too much to the kids, make that your number one priority, to try to reduce that, help them to understand that it's not in their best interest or the kids' best interest. I think we also recognize the importance of creating high structure environments for our students. So many of our students, regardless of the reason for their behavior, the diagnosis, have a sense of anxiety around any kind of change, a lack of boundaries, and a lack of structure. So we really need to ensure that we make their day as predictable as possible. And I really encourage you to use visual schedules, whether it is using words or it's using pictures and symbols, and that you're giving your student with needs a ton of warning for every transition that comes along and any change to the program. We understand that it is a classroom that could have anywhere between 20 and 32 kids. And so we know that things do change, and we have to be flexible over the course of the day. But our kids with the highest needs need us to provide those parameters and those boundaries for them, so they know what to expect. Because without those structures, they feel kind of lost in space. And that creates anxiety that can then in turn show up as behavior. We also really need to be really explicit in how we teach self-regulation strategies. Some kids come to school with self-regulation strategies that are well practiced. Some are almost innate for some students. And some students require a lot of practice, and we need to teach them very specifically. I love Stuart Shanker's work, and if you're not using zones of regulation, that would be an area that you really might want to consider exploring. So when students start to move into the yellow zone, or starting to become more escalated, we need to teach them what that yellow zone looks like and feels like, and then teach them specifically things that they can do to come back down into the green zone. So we need to be, again, I keep using the word explicit, but that's really what we need to do, because so many of our students don't understand it, and we have to be able to help them understand and then practice those behaviors. The next piece is kind of something we all know, but it's the importance of positive reinforcement. But I want to just go into a little bit more depth. I want you to think about consequences and positive reinforcement a little bit like a bank account. We know that we have to put in a lot of positive reinforcements. That's putting money into the bank account over and over. Every time we see the littlest things that a student is doing what we expect, positive, positive, positive reinforcement. Because we need to build up that bank, because there will be times that there may be consequences, and we need to have built trust with that student and a ton of positives before we take that one big withdrawal from our bank account, which is the consequence that may happen. So if you are working with a staff member who is focusing too much on consequences all the time, whether it's punitive or whether it's just they feel that that's the right thing to do to consequence the student for behavior, really talk about the concept of a bank account, and that you need to put in way more positives than you do withdrawals. Another piece is really minimizing the amount of competition between and amongst students. Our students who have the bigger behaviors are the ones that have a real sense of what is fair, what is not fair, winning and losing. And so often, when we put our kids in a situation where there is competition, even if it's two teams playing together competitively, that can really escalate a student. So wherever it's reasonable, work more towards cooperative activities rather than competitive activities. The next one is something that I have had such success with, and really try to share with as many people as I can. And that is the importance of helping the student practice what to do when the student is escalating. So it kind of goes back to practicing self-regulation strategies. If you think about, let's say you're a coach of a basketball team. No student comes to the court being able to dunk a basket every single time and understand the rules of basketball and how to pass and how not to travel. And I'm not much of a basketball player, so I apologize to basketball coaches out there. But what we need to do is we need to practice those skills. So we take them into the gym and we give them the skills. How do you do a layup? How do you stand in the key? What does traveling mean? How do we pass the ball? How do we work as a team? Those are skills that we explicitly teach our kids in basketball. And the same can be said of piano lessons or dance or whatever it happens to be. We need to do the same with our kids who have big behaviors. We need to practice what it looks like and sounds like when they're behaving appropriately. We need to practice what to do when the student is escalated. And we practice it when the student is calm. And as Stuart Shanker would say, calm, alert, and learning. That's the time that we need to role play. We practice over and over and over again. If you're beginning to feel escalated, you are going to go for a walk on a break. You're going to go to the calming area. You're going to practice your deep breathing. Whatever those strategies are that are part of the behavior safety plan and the IEP, we need to take the time to practice. Because what we're doing neurologically is we're strengthening or myelating the dendrites in the student's brain so that it becomes habitual to do what we want them to do. And it's something that we're not very good at. We talk to the student about what to do and what we expect, but it's actually going through the motions of practicing and telling them we're practicing, so you're going to be successful the next time you start to feel angry. And we're going to talk about it and be consistent with the wording. So that might be something that you want to take away because it's something that not a lot of schools are using and works so well. We need to also remember, it kind of goes back to not talking too much, be really clear and really positive and really short directions when we are directing a student to change behavior. Take a breath, go sit in your safe space. Not come away from there, get away from the door. It's using the words of the thing that we want them to do. Don't use the word what we don't want them to do, because the brain actually doesn't hear don't. The brain actually will hear don't. Like when we say don't hit the door, the brain will actually hear hit the door. But if we say sit in your calming chair, that's all the brain hears. So really make sure that your directions are positive and what you want the student to do, not what you don't want them to do. That was really wordy, sorry. This is another one this is my own observation. So I'm not sure I can actually say that this is based in research, but I've worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students with special education needs. They know what we think about them. They know if we are frustrated with them. They know if we are upset or angry. So we have to do our best to always be thinking positively of the student, because when that happens, they're going to be much more responsive to us. And sometimes I say we have to fake it till we make it. So even if we have to fake being calm, fake being happy, or at least a neutral tone, that's really important because the student feels what we are feeling. This next point is something that has made a big difference for the schools that I've worked with. And it's, I've used the word behavior tonight because I've got to this particular point and you wouldn't have understood if I were saying it otherwise. I think we need to stop using the word behavior. We certainly need to stop using the words violent behavior. I believe that violence is intentional. Our students with special education needs are aggressive not because it's intentional, although it sometimes feels like that and it looks like that. But if we substitute the word violent behavior with communication or with the word anxiety, it actually changes our approach for how we're going to work with that student. If we think of a student who's escalated as trying to communicate something to us, we will start looking at what is this student trying to tell us that he or she is not able to? Or what is this student feeling anxious about that I can help them by reducing whatever that anxiety trigger is? But if we think about it in terms of behavior, we are more likely to be reactive and less likely to be proactive. It is a piece that has made a big difference for the schools that I've worked in. And we really have got rid of the word violent. And we see it in the media. We see it in even in a lot of the language that we're reading from Union. And for a purpose, they're trying to get supports. And I don't disagree with that. But if we are really looking at how we change our behaviors with students, if we just use that word communication or anxiety, that's really going to help us be more proactive in supporting or serving the student better. So speaking of too much talk, that's what I'm doing. It's time to hear a little bit from you again. So we need to create school cultures that reduce aggressive behaviors. So in your experience, what is one thing that you have seen or one thing that you have tried that helps to create a school environment that reduces behaviors? So type in something that you've either done or something that you have seen that you find is creating a more inclusive climate, more inclusive culture for our students with behavior needs? So many awesome ideas here. Debbie, I really like that. Teachers greeting students at the door. It's such a simple thing. And if you go back to the work of Ron Morrish, and those of you who are as old as I am, Ron's books have been around for a long time. But that's kind of what his premise is, to create a positive culture. We need to greet our students every day that you are important. And we particularly need to be doing that with our kids with special needs. Tracy, I like that about the weekly updates about what might be going on in students' lives, so that we can be more caring and more concerned about them, and having that trusted adult, knowing who the student can go to. Excellent. Bev, I like that, a student well-being team. That would be something I'd like to learn a little bit more about, because that sounds like a great way for building a welcoming culture. Jennifer, I love that. Calm is a superpower. You know what? And that's something I'm doing a bit of supply work at a school, and that's something that we've been working with the student that the reason I'm there to help support the school when the principal is away. And that's exactly how you are a superhero. When you can stay calm, it's a superhero. So most importantly, we as the adults have to ensure that we are modeling that for the student. And even though inside we can get really riled up, that's just human nature, we can never let it show. So we have to fake it till we make it. Kathy, I really like a body break. Not sure what hub stands for, but what I'm thinking that might mean is some kind of a calm room where students can go. Obviously, have to be supervised, but some schools call it a chill room or a calming room or a quiet room. All new schools in that I'm aware of are all being built with calming rooms in place, and we need to teach kids how to use those proactively. So when students are beginning to feel escalated, they need to go to a calming room as a place to de-escalate. We need to get them to the point where that's a choice that they make. It should never be a consequence, and it should never be punitive. So there are most school boards have pretty specific rules and regulations around how to use a calming room. And so be sure you know what yours are. But the bottom line is you never hold the door closed, and it should never be seen as punitive. Carrie, I really like that. Keeping kids engaged in the learning. One of the reasons that I mentioned, one of the triggers for behavior can often be frustration, and that's from a lack of engagement. It is so essential that in our classrooms, and so maybe here's a good tip that you can take back tomorrow. If we could get teachers to plan, and if we could build whole school cultures with the student with special education needs at the forefront, it will work for everybody else. Because what we traditionally have done is, as teachers or as administrators, creating whole school programs, we plan for the typically developing students, and then we think, okay, now what can we do to accommodate the students with special education needs? What works so brilliantly is to flip that around. If we plan for our highest needs students and create our programming so that it works for them, it's still going to work for everybody else. So that's around how do we differentiate for the needs of our neediest kids? It will work for everybody else. And as the Learning for All document says, what is necessary for some is good for all. And so many of our staff feel like having kids with significant needs places a burden on them in terms of the amount of work that they have to do. And they're right when we plan first for the typically developing kids, and then how do we plan for student A, B, C, D, and how many students beyond that. If we flip it around and encourage our teachers to plan for student A, B, and C, that's still going to work for the other students. So it's just a way of flipping around planning and to really focus on differentiation that might be a tool that will be useful for some of your teachers. Okay, I'm very cognizant of the time and how much more I still want to do, so I'm just going to move on. And we won't spend as much time on this next section, but I want to talk about the importance of communication. And a couple of you have already highlighted this. Our staff need to feel supported. We've been in their shoes. We've all been teachers, but when they've got a student or students with significant behavior concerns, they need our backup. We need to listen. We need to be present. We really need to give them the positive reinforcement of the efforts that they are making. And my mantra as a principal has always been, people are doing the best they know how to do. Nobody wakes up in the morning saying, I think I'll go to school today and do a really lousy job. People come to school doing the best they know how. But so many people are afraid that they don't want to show that they don't know what to do. And so what they do unintentionally is they build up a barrier around themselves, a defensive barrier that says, I can't do anymore. I can't manage that student. Get that student out of my class. And what that is really, what I hear is that teacher saying, I don't know how to meet this student's needs. Please help me. And it doesn't always come across that way, but 99% of the time, that's actually what the teacher is saying. So it shows the importance of how we need to be there on their side and supporting them with clear expectations of what we want in order to meet the student needs. Another thing of when we're communicating with staff is the importance of, and so many of you have listed some great ideas about how do we collectively create an environment that is inclusive of all of our students. And it needs to be a safe and caring environment for everybody, the staff and for the students. But no one person can own that. We need a shared vision where we're working together to get us to that point. The next point is being a co-learner, and because we don't come to the table knowing all that's available to support our students. So we need to come to the table with our staff as a co-learner, utilizing the supports that are available to us, whether it's central office staff or whoever you have that is providing resource support for your school. So sit down with your teachers and show that we're in this together. We are serving this student, because I'm such a believer in servant leadership. Our job is to serve this student. Together, we're going to figure out how we can best meet his needs or her needs. And that kind of goes to the point, acknowledge the challenge. We can't minimize just how emotionally and often physically exhausting it can be when we have a student with extreme needs. So we need to acknowledge that challenge, but we have to help our teacher understand that you have the power to be able to make this situation better. You are in control of this, and we never take away the power from the teacher. We need to help them believe that they actually have that power. These are just some random thoughts around communication, but it kind of goes back to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, that we must have a debrief after every significant escalation, always whenever there's been an injury. But anytime that there's been a serious issue with a student, we have to sit down as soon as possible, and it really should be the day that it happens. Review the behavior safety plan. What did we do? What worked? What didn't work? Do we need to change the IEP or the safety plan? We need to be part of that as administrators. We can't leave that to our special education staff and the teachers. These are our most vulnerable students in the school, and we owe it to them to be present in order to support them and to support our staff. And I mentioned, and we could do a whole hour just on the whole union piece around students with aggressive behavior. We need to be aware of the union perspective, and they're there to protect the safety of their members, and we need to honor that and respect that. That's the environment in which we work. My only piece of advice would be aware of that perspective, but we need to stand strong as leaders. When we know what needs to be done, it's within the parameters of the collective agreement or legislation or policy and procedure. We need to stand strong. If we continue to build positive relationships with our staff, if we're transparent, if we are helping them understand what the policies and the laws are, then we're most likely to be able to help them understand the things that we must do on behalf of the student in order to protect everybody, but also to meet the needs of a student with special needs. So don't be afraid of that union presence. Welcome it, but stand strong as a leader. I could go into, again, a whole other hour on just communication with parents, but for tonight's purpose, just a couple of key points. The importance of having regular communication with the parent of the child that has significant needs. And as time-consuming as it appears to be, I really suggest at least weekly calls, just in finding any strength, any positive that you can share. Because you know that you've had lots of calls that you have to make and will continue to have to make for a student that has significant needs. For a parent to be able to pick up the phone and have the principal or the vice principal on the other end say, I just wanted to tell you that Carolyn had a great day today. She followed her schedule for the first 2 periods of the morning. For a parent to receive that phone call and not be like dread picking up the phone will make a huge difference in how supportive they will be as we work with their child. Another piece that I have found works really well is asking the parent of the child with special education needs if we can share some information with other parents about their child's, I'm going to use the word disability. So if we have a child with autism, I've never had a parent say no. And I've gone to the parent and said, can I share with other parents that your child has autism so that they can begin to understand why your child sometimes has meltdowns and how we handle those meltdowns? Because what we're trying to do is build a caring wraparound community for this member of our classroom and of our school. And I've had every single parent say, yes, please. I feel like I am so alone out here. I feel judged by other parents. Please help them understand what my son, what my daughter's needs are. And we talk about what the parameters of confidentiality are that they want, and we respect that. But it has made such a difference for certainly the families, but in helping just to reduce the parent anxiety around these really tricky situations. Really briefly, I worked with a school that had a student with autism and was also gifted, and a fairly young student, grade 4, I think, and extreme aggression and running through the halls and smashing the trophy cases and aggressive with staff and very verbally aggressive with other students. And we put in place additional support for that student for a period of time to really teach the self-regulation strategies, the de-escalation strategies. But while all of the aggression was happening, we had a huge number of parents calling the superintendent and the trustee about wanting to get this student out of the school. And so with the parent's permission, the permission of the parent of the child with needs, she was happy to have me share information about her child. And we spent a huge amount of time calling parents and helping those parents understand about what autism was, and explained, without going into graphic detail, but explained the programming that we were putting in place. And for those very upset parents, I called those parents for 2 months every single Friday. And at the end of the week, I would just give them an update. And it made all the difference, to the point that those parents eventually wanted to meet with the mother of the child with needs to see what they could do to help ease her struggle that she was having as a parent. It doesn't always turn out that smoothly, but the investment in time at the beginning and all of that proactive communication makes an incredible difference in de-escalating just the whole dynamic within a school and within your school community. So again, and if you have more questions about this, I'll give you my contact information at the end, and I'd be happy to to listen to you and help you out if you're really struggling with a situation like this. I'm going to skip over this next question because we've got a couple more things to do, but it's just really, I wanted to talk a little bit about communication in a highly unionized environment. But the fundamental thing that we need to think about is how do we keep those channels of communication open and keep the student at the center of all of our conversations. And when we do that, we can work well with union in a unionized environment, always making incremental steps forward with the student at the center. Just going to give you a couple of tips about how to maximize the support that you have or don't have in your school. And if this is something that you'd like some more information on, we're going to be hosting an hour-long webinar on this very topic later on in this school year. But I really encourage you to be as flexible as you can with your EA support, making sure that, and most schools are doing this already, but that no one EA is, we use the word Velcroed to a particular student. What works really well is to have a loose schedule where your educational assistants are, but having everybody on a walkie-talkie where if somebody's needing some backup support, they can use the walkie-talkie, and you establish a very simple, calm way of communicating. A student requiring assistance, room 102, and everybody knows, oh, room 102, that's student A. And then somebody will respond back, I can be there, because there are a very limited number of students who require one-on-one support throughout an entire school day. There are some, and I'm not suggesting that there's some that require two support people with them all the time. But we're trying to develop students' independence. Often our support staff can step away from a student for a little bit to go where the need is. So try to look at a more flexible EA schedule if you haven't done that already. And that goes to the next point that I have about walkie-talkies. If you can arrange for some short-term coaching, I see we've got a few people from Thames Valley, and I stole an idea of yours and brought it to Durham. And we have in Durham what's called a START team, Short-Term Assistance Response Team. And it's a limited number, very small. It was, I think we started off with about 6 or 7 centrally assigned EAs who are then allocated to a school where there is a highly escalated situation. And they model for the staff that are already there how to better meet the needs of that particular student. So they go in, they work as mentors, and they work side by side with another EA, helping them to to put in place better programming, better strategies, and then there's a real gradual release of that support until we go have the permanent staff able to utilize improved strategies to meet the needs. Great idea. Thames Valley, for the best of my knowledge, was the one that started it, and it's now a strategy that's being used across the province. Another little tip that you might want to think about is think about, as administrator, taking the student, taking the class. If there's a student that has an escalation, the principal takes the rest of the class while the teacher works with the student with the significant needs. So that's empowering that teacher to better meet the needs of that student and to build a relationship. Because so often it's the reverse. We're asked to come into a situation and remove the student who has the escalation. It's better to sometimes flip that arrangement around. It really does empower the teacher. So when we go back and look at your challenges, we've hit on quite a few of them, and I just need to pull out my notes here. but certainly for the situation where we've got a teacher not following an IEP, again, remember they're doing the best they know how to do. So we have to help them, first of all, understand their obligation, but also what are the supports that they need in order to better meet those student needs, and always coming from that place of support first. But if they continue to be resistant, we have to up our role in terms of making it a clear directive that they need to follow the IEP, and that can move all the way up through a TPA process. And a couple of your other questions where you've talked about avoiding, how do we avoid crisis management? We've talked about a few of those things tonight. If we try some of those strategies, I really think that you're going to find that some of the behaviors are going to be reduced. So there are a whole range of things that we're doing at OPC that we're hoping will meet your needs and the challenges that you're having. So there are 2 more free webinars that are coming up, and they're already posted. You can see them in Joanne Robinson's weekly bulletin, or you can also go online on the OPC website to register. We have one that is on April 12th around putting special education students at the center of school improvement. Another one, June the 6th, is about maximizing supports, and I've decided that June might be a good time for that one, as we're really starting to look ahead to the coming year about things that we might be able to do differently to maximize support for your students. Another opportunity that is coming up on March the 22nd is I'm hosting a one-day workshop in Upper Grand District School Board, and it's going to be held in Guelph at their education center. And this is one day focused on sort of everything that we've talked about today, but a lot more time for conversation and looking specifically at your challenges. And that's $50 for the day. And that gets you your lunch and a full day of PD. You can register for that online. And there are also going to be a couple more webinars or a couple more one-day sessions coming up. I'm also available to come to your school board to do a customized one-day workshop as well. So if there's something that you think your school board would like, I'm more than happy to come and customize a program for you. Beginning on March the 26th is a principal development course. It's a 25-hour course, and it's one of the several PDCs that are offered through OPC. And that is going to be, again, on special education. And we use an inquiry as the lens through which you do the whole course. So a challenge that you're having will be the lens that you'll do all your work through. So registration is open for that one for, I think it's until March the 13th. And then we have our full AQ, Special Education for Administrators course, and that's 125 hours. We will be doing a blended course beginning the second week of July. So that's 4 days face-to-face for modules 1 and 2, and then the remainder of the course is online. We haven't firmed up where that one's going to be held. It's always been held in Toronto before. We're exploring some other possibilities as well for that one. We're going to be doing a fully online SIA course. It says late May here. I've changed that. That's going to be actually we're going to start it in the summer. Late May is not a time for starting a heavy AQ course. It's just simply too busy for administrators, so we're going to look at that in May. We are going to take a minute right now, and we have a little questionnaire for you that we're just going to bring onto the screen now. And we're looking at creating some more one-day workshops into next year. And we're curious about what you would like to spend a day learning about in the area of special education. So if you could just take a moment, and we're just about to the end of our webinar right now, but if you could take a moment and type your answer in the box. What's on your mind? What would you like to learn more about in a one-day $50 workshop? So I'm just going to turn off my mic for a moment and give you a moment to answer that question if you have anything in mind. I would love to be able to do this to help you, because there's some straightforward strategies for these complex issues, and I'm going to take your information here and we'll look at what we can do next for you. But I really do encourage you, if you are able to get to Guelph, where we can host up to about 35 people for that day in Guelph. And so if you can take the day, that's March 22nd, to come, that would be fantastic. Really think about that PDC course that's the end of March. It's not a terribly heavy course, it's 25 hours. And that's over the course of about a month. And lots of discussion, lots of time online. And that might be a good starting place for you if you're looking, because a lot of the things that you are showing that you're interested in here will go into depth. But I'll take that back and we'll look at what our next opportunity is for you. So just as we come to the end, and this, as I mentioned at the beginning, this webinar is being recorded, and we are going to upload it onto the OPC YouTube channel. And it's our intention that we will put a link to that in one of Joanne Robinson's bulletins within the next couple of weeks. But these were 3 resources that, if you weren't familiar with, I thought you might want to take a look at. The one that I think every principal needs to be sure they know so they can share it with their teachers is the OTF Teacher's Gateway to Special Education. You can plug in any exceptionality, and there's a range of strategies and accommodations that you can use to be able to meet the needs of that particular student. The next resource that is there is a book that I've fairly recently discovered called Hanging In: How to Deal with Our Most Challenging Students. And it is full of case studies, picked it up off Amazon, and full of case studies and practical strategies that you can use to reduce behaviors. And then the last is an article around working with aggressive students that I found pretty helpful. So if you're not catching these right now, you can certainly pick up these resources and the links once we post this webinar. And I am more than happy to stay connected with you. If you've got questions that are on your mind, just send me an email. My email is C for Special Education for Administrators, clead@principals.ca. And I'm happy just to help. That's what I'm here for. So if there's something that I can do, either because you've got a burning question, or if you've got something that you'd like to see in your school board in terms of a one-day workshop or the full AQ, let me know, and I'm more than happy to come in. So just as we wrap up for tonight, I just would like you to take a second to type in one thing that you've picked up from tonight that you think might be a strategy or a helpful hint that you are going to try in the next couple of days. And with that, so please take a moment to do that. And again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I recognize what a busy time it is. You're getting close to March break, and I know things can go off the rails in schools a little bit as we come up to those big breaks. So you are so busy right now. I am so appreciative of you taking the time for your professional learning on behalf of your kids. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a great evening, and please don't hesitate to connect with me if I can